Welcome back, everybody. This is the Messy City Podcast. I've got my friend Butch Rigby here with me today. Kansas Cityan, developer, attorney, film buff, man about town, and really a great friend. One of the few Kansas Cityans who actually visited me in Savannah when we lived there for 8 years. So, welcome, Butch. I'm really excited to have you here today.
I'm delighted to be here, Kevin, my good friend.
Well, Butch, there's a ton of stuff we could talk about, and we kind of joked beforehand we could probably do 3 or 4 hours, at the drop of a hat. But we'll try to keep it short. I really want to talk about. I think your path to becoming a developer is really interesting, and so like people who maybe don't know you that well today, they know you as like big shot Kansas City developer, right? How many properties do you own?
I've got 17 commercial buildings right now.
Yeah. And so, people look at that and they go, wow, this kind of like crazy rich developer, does all these projects everywhere. But the truth is you are really just like anybody else. You started out with nothing, started really small, and gradually built up over a long time to do this. So I'm curious, I know I've heard your story before of how you kind of got into doing things, but I think it'd be interesting for other people to know, especially how somebody gets started and then, builds up a portfolio over a longer period of time. And so I think if I remember right, you talked about like you initially started, you did a lot of actual construction work on buildings when you were a young guy.
I did. I was, thinking about going to college, in high school up in Liberty. And my father had died when I was in high school a couple of years before. And my mother was, had 4 kids and I was the oldest. And, her saying was, you're going to college and you're going to pay for it. And so, but one afternoon there was a hailstorm up in Liberty and she had this rickety old garage behind her office building and she got a little money for the roof. Well, my mother, she gets this check and she goes, I'm going to make you a deal. I want you to roof my back office and I'll give you $275. And I'm like, well, I've never roofed a building. She goes, I know, I bought you a book. And she handed me a book on how to roof a house. She goes, I don't care what it looks like. I just don't want it to leak. So I'm like, hey, that'll pay for a semester of college, So she kept her insurance money because she needed it to raise the kids. And so we were very, resourceful. My mother kind of instilled that in all of us. So I roofed it and that paid for my first year of college. And I thought, well, that wasn't so bad. And so as I got down to UMKC, back then it was 15 hours, $275.
Plus, it was a few years ago.
Yeah, it was a few years ago. I would be, most of the listeners were not born, I'm sure. But anyway, and so I did that. I was in college at UMKC. I roomed with 4 other guys in a house. And my roommate, Paul Simmons, and I figured out we could roof houses and paint houses. And if we bid them right, we'd make about $10 an hour each man. And so it was, it was good. I worked construction and, I kind of worked my way in one summer and I bought a little house for $1,500 out of a classified ad. I bet most people still don't know what a classified ad is either, but in the newspaper. And we, I think I took a car jack and I lifted the house up and then put concrete block under it. So certainly learned by doing and did everything: sheetrock, paint, wire, plumb. Matter of fact, we ended up with 9 houses as we were going through college, but my roommate, Paul, that wasn't for him. He didn't like dealing with the tenants. He didn't like dealing with banks. And so he became a master electrician and a master plumber, although he won't admit to being a master plumber because he won't do that work anymore. But and to this very day, 40 some years later, Paul Simmons has wired every single building I've ever bought. And we'll continue to do so as our retirement theory is pine boxes leaving our houses horizontal. So that's how I got started, was certainly buying little bitty, very small houses that needed a lot of work.
Why did you think that was a good idea when you were young? You must have been like, what, 19, 20 years old?
19, 20 years old. Well, it was a low barrier to entry. You could buy these houses for $1,500, $4,000, $5,000. And I really did have this belief that we were going to renovate these houses and bring, very good environments to people who would be on Section 8 or, because they were mostly Kensington Gardens, the east side of town. And, we did. We always, for some reason, we knew to keep them small and easy, 2 and 3 bedrooms, but little bitty ranch houses. And, we did. They would get rather destroyed every, most of the time, not all the time, and we had to remodel them again. But, it was really a good training ground. Did make a lot of money at it.
And you were doing this like while you're still going to college.
Yeah, I was going to college. I would, in the summers, we would get up early. I mean, we'd get up, 5:00 and we'd go work, and, you'd get the full day in and you'd work till night, and then you'd go out and go to Charlie Hooper's, which, believe it or not, was there when I was there. And we'd either have a paint job going or we'd be working in one of our houses. And for some reason, we bought 7 houses of the 9 on Kensington Avenue. So they were Kensington 1, 2, 3, and we made a little business of it, but, mostly it was a training ground.
Yeah. How long did you have those? How long did you keep them?
I had those until the early 90s. Okay. After college, I, went to law school because I wanted to go to Hollywood and I wanted to, to work, in the film business. And so I got a law degree because I could be a producer. And I went out to Hollywood and I ended up working on movie crews. I worked as a grip. I worked as a stunt crew assistant. I, jumped off a building once and onto cardboard boxes so I could get a cool T-shirt, and I did that. And Paul sort of ran the houses when I was in Hollywood. And then I got back and decided I really enjoyed being in Kansas City more than, Los Angeles. And, so I ended up, we had those houses a few more years, but I eventually sold them to a young investor that wanted to be in that business because I came to the conclusion that I wanted to buy an office building and really got interested in the idea. So, of course, back in 1994, I went down to what was then just 18th and Wyandotte, or the old Film Road district. There was no crossroads. And I bought a 20,000 foot building for $125,000 with parking and everything because buildings were vacant down there. And I literally just started filling in with my lawyer buddies, just creating offices. So, it was a great, entry. And, I had to come up with $20,000 down payment and might as well have been $1 million. I scraped it together, but
yeah, I was going to ask you that. So that first building you bought it with a bank loan then, or
yeah, I got an SBA loan. It was a guaranteed loan, and I went to a bank, and so I didn't have to put down quite as much. The 20,000 included some money to renovate 4 or 5 offices, and when I did, I eventually met up with one of my buddies from law school, a guy named Wade Kinderger up at Security Bank. And Wade and I have been doing business for 30 years now. And to this day, he still does business along with other bankers. But yeah, that first one was just bank financing, fix it up, rent 4 offices, show them the leases, borrow a little more money, fix them up, rent more offices, keep showing them the leases. And eventually I had 18 lawyers. The building was full. I didn't know if I was the smartest guy in the world filling my building with lawyers or the dumbest guy in the world. But
it's who you knew.
It's who I knew, and I understood how what they needed, and it was really an early version of a shared office space.
Yeah, I was going to say it was like co-working. But,
co-working. They had a shared conference room, shared copier, shared reception, some secretarial services. Yeah.
And did I remember right that you and some other guys ended up doing like a lot of that renovation work yourself on that building, or how did you get it done with like doing those like 4 offices?
I would paint it myself. I would wire it. I would, had Paul do some stuff. I had an air conditioning contractor come in and, put some new air conditioning in. But if there was any lifting, painting, sheetrocking, roof patching, anything, I did it all. And I had a law degree, so I was practicing a little bit of law. And we had also started, thank you, Walt Disney and the Film Society and the Film Festival. So, but you're 30-something years old. You got all the energy you'll ever need.
Yeah, that's definitely it's one of the things that when you're young, you've got all that energy, and
Yeah.
as you get older, you've got more wisdom, but a whole lot less energy.
Yeah.
So
Yeah.
I remember like one of the things you and I have talked about before in relation to development, like now you own strictly commercial properties,
Correct.
and you're more of a fan of owning on the commercial side as opposed to the residential. Did that come from like the experience of owning those first houses years ago and just working with those kind of tenants versus working with commercial tenants?
You know, I will say that the appeal of a commercial office building appealed to me not only because, you work with houses, people come and they go, and a lot of people did it because, you pretty much repaint the place and carpet it if need be, and they're in
Mhm.
there. In commercial real estate, it's a much higher bar to entry, but the architecture is interesting. That first building was the original home to Commonwealth Theaters. It had an abandoned screening room. I actually ended up renovating that screening room and made deals with all the studios to show movies. And it was really the genesis of what later would become the Screenland Theaters,
Mhm.
circuit. But no, I just like the office buildings, and
Mhm.
I can't really say that I disliked residential, but it wasn't for me. And I think you need to do the things in life that give you passion. And honestly, I had an office building that was a home to a movie theater company, and my two passions were architecture and film.
Mhm.
So it sort of satisfied both. And then, the Universal Pictures building became available. So I purchased it from Universal Pictures, and then a big old giant parking lot became available for almost no money at 17th and Central. So I bought it, and
Mhm.
all of a sudden they announced the Performing Arts Center, and everybody goes crazy. So
Mhm.
I just kept rolling one building into the next, and it's a slow, slow way to earn money.
Yeah.
I mean,
Yeah.
I have to say, if you think you're going to get in there and do it and quote flip a building, that just isn't going to happen. And every time a building looks like it'll make so much money, you can go back and be on easy street. It won't. Oh, what do you mean? I need a $32,000 air conditioner,
Yeah. Yeah.
and yeah,
So I think also you were the first person that I learned that you knew all about that interesting film history. And so, like you talked about here, that area where you bought that first building we called Film Row. What was, there may not be a lot of people who understand, like here in the Midwest, we
sure.
had this incredible history with the Hollywood studios. What was that all about?
Film Row was the name of the area basically surrounding 18th and Wyandotte. And back in the beginning, days of film distribution, motion picture films until just a few years ago were on canisters of film, and you'd have 6 large reels that maybe more that typically ended up, being projected. Well, they had to have a way to get these motion pictures distributed around the country. You didn't have multiplexes. You would
Hmm.
have dozens and dozens and dozens of single theaters in any one city or any place, and a movie theater in every small town in the territory.
Hmm.
So there were about 32 areas or points of distribution for all the major motion picture studios, and they shared a lot of common traits. First of all, the 7 major studios always had an office. Kansas City served Kansas, part of Nebraska, Missouri, parts of Oklahoma, and kind of a surrounded area there. The areas were, kind of tight and concise. The buildings reflected typically an Art Deco architecture that was popular when most of them were being built. They were also fireproof because films before 1950 were highly
Hmm. Hmm.
flammable,
Hmm.
nitrate film. And so Kansas City happened to have one of the very few fully intact film row districts in America. Oklahoma City had one, but most of them were located just outside the downtown area for
Hmm.
fire concerns. And so most of the downtown areas in this country, they just kept getting bigger and bigger and bigger and tearing down buildings to build tall ones. Well, as you know, the loop sort of isolated our downtown, and the
Hmm.
sprawl of Kansas City, the suburban sprawl of Kansas City, really left what is today the crossroads intact with a lot of 2, 3, 1-story buildings that have a lot of character. Well, Film Row is left intact. I looked and looked and looked all one winter in 1994, 93, 94 for a building. I just got it in my mind. I wanted it. And when I found out that there was a Film Row building available, and I had read about Film Row,
Mhm.
I went down there, and this Art Deco, and many people might know it as the home of Maya Yoga at between Wyandotte and Central on 18th Street on the south. But it was the old Commonwealth Theater's building,
Hmm.
and I went through there, and it was 2 degrees below zero, and Whitney Kerr was showing me, and couple other guys, and you could tell he is just 3 years the thing had been vacant, and they just cut the price in half.
Hmm.
And I saw the empty screening room and said, "Oh, this is for me." And so, and that's a good point because I love that building. I love the Art Deco architecture. I love the history. So I took all my movie posters I've been collecting, had them framed, and decorated the whole building, and eventually redid the screening room. Well, all of a sudden, you go in that building, it has a personality. It tells a story. It's unlike anything else anybody's ever seen, and people loved it. And I realized your passion will be reflected in the things you do. And if you don't have passion, I mean, it's sort of like I was down in Florida once, and these guys are all bragging they're playing tennis because their strip centers make them so much money they don't have to work. And about 3 years later, after the mild recession, my buddy who I was down there with said, "Oh, all those guys are all working in a finance company now because they all lost their buildings." And so yeah, I Film Row was home to Paramount Pictures, 20th Century Fox, Columbia Pictures, MGM, Universal, and then a lot of small studios. Shirley Hillsberg, who is one of the greats as far as preserving Kansas City's history, is renovating the MGM building and the Columbia building. And I happen to have the old brass plaque from the MGM building, and I gave it to her, or John Shipp and I did.
Mhm.
But and I can't say enough about Shirley Hillsberg. She, has taken her resources and done for buildings what nobody can do. I
Right.
mean, it's great. And so I'm delighted that she's renovating and preserving some of those Film Row buildings.
Yeah. So presumably there was an advantage for the studios to all co-locate, like all right next to each other then?
Absolutely.
That just made the distribution easier for the theaters?
You
Or?
think about it, all the films would be shipped into Kansas City. And then every studio, some of them had screening rooms, most of them did, but they all had an inspection room. And I mean, it was a kind of a stereotype back then, but women would sit downstairs and they would wear white gloves and they'd roll the film and inspect it. There were film inspectors to make sure that there weren't any tears, burns, marks, huge scratches. And they would inspect it, make sure, because the film was being circulated. They'd first go down to the first run houses downtown, the Midland and the Capri and things like that. And then it would get out to the suburbs, in its second run. And it might go out to the Granada in Kansas City, Kansas, or the Rock Hill, or the Brookside. And it would, these films would be circulated around. They called them exchanges because in the very early days, you literally traded films back and forth. You came in, dropped them off, picked up another. So theater owners from all around, the area, from the region, would come in Kansas City. They'd go down to Film Row. They'd eat at the Screenland Cafe, which is the derivation of the name Screenland, my company. But they would eat there. They would go look at an MGM picture or Warner Brothers picture. They'd look at the latest things. They'd do their business. They'd go to Steuben Theater Supply, or they'd go, they'd buy concessions, do all their ordering, and do all their business in a location. And they were together because the fire codes were very strict. They had to be in a district that was completely, isolated. And so most Film Rows were their own little world.
That's interesting. Huh.
Yeah.
That's an incredible thing. And then, I mean, I know just from looking at other Kansas City history that there used to be these little like single screen neighborhood theaters then all over town. Like over in Volker off 39th Street, there was one near 39th and Bell, which like the building is still there, but they tore off the front of it.
Yeah. The back, the last of the surviving operating theaters are the Screenland Armour in North Kansas City, 1928, and the B&B Main Street downtown, 1927, that operate as a theater.
Right.
There are a lot of examples around town of what used to be theaters. The Screenland Granada, we had operating for a while, 1929. And it was, they're beautiful, but the
Right.
model doesn't work.
Yeah.
Everybody says, "Oh, come and open a Screenland." I go, "Screenland is a real estate company." But I will say that that Adam Roberts and Brent Miller, who now operate the theater side of the business and are now the owners of the Screenland Armor building because we sold it to them, they have 4 screens. And they are showmen, and they make me proud every single day. But again, that was a real estate deal. I developed the building, and had my passion for films satisfied.
Yeah. I don't think I can't remember if we ever talked about this, but when I was in college at KU for 2 years, one of the jobs I had was I was a projectionist for the student film series.
I think you did
I
tell
think I
me
may have
that.
told you, yeah.
Old Father Studio had
Yeah.
such a great presence there. And
Yeah.
I learned early on how to project film. And, a lot of my managers, that was a big thing. And projecting film was an art.
Yes. Yeah. I mean, there were a couple of moments that were really, really bad. Mostly it was really fun and easy, but I remember one film I was showing where the sound was off the screen and people were not happy.
Oh,
and then the only way I didn't know how to fix it until we got to the second reel. And then we clicked over to the second reel and everything was in line and people, kind of applaud, derisively,
Yeah.
but it was, you just kind of felt like a little helpless in that moment.
It's funny. I started a tradition of showing Casablanca on Valentine's Day. And we did this at the original Screenland many, many years ago before everybody was doing it. And it was an old film print. I mean, it was a reprint, but it was a film print. And I had a completely full theater with everybody paying $60 for a package: wine, chocolates, flowers, popcorn. It was great. And the film broke. And I had to go out there and entertain the whole audience while my young manager, repaired the film and got it back. And I went back upstairs and I told her not to panic. And she looked, and before she started the film, she stopped, took a breath, went through the whole projector. And I thought, now this young woman gets it. You got to be under control. But boy, I spent many, many years sitting in my theater, hoping the film didn't break or hoping it didn't burn or hoping it didn't scratch. So I have become a real fan of the digital projection, but yeah.
Yeah. I mean, a great film that's now it's an older film, I guess, 30 years old, but that kind of showed the dangers of that Italian film, Cinema Paradiso.
Oh, yeah.
Where they ended up having the fire.
One of the most beautiful films.
Wonderful.
If you haven't seen it, don't be afraid of the subtitles.
Yeah, it's great.
The music alone is worth the experience, but it's a beautiful film.
Beautiful, heartbreaking kind of story.
Oh, my gosh, yeah.
Really
One
great.
of my favorites.
Yeah. So after you dip your toe in the commercial building market, then eventually you start doing more, and then you ended up with the building where I used to be a tenant in.
Yes.
The original Screenland.
Yes.
Theater building. And so how far along were you at that point? Was that like, were you selling other buildings to be able to buy bigger buildings at that point, or were you trying to add?
No, at that point, I owned the Universal building. I owned the original. I did sell one. I sold the parking lot that I bought across from what is now the Performing Arts Center and the Universal Pictures building. And then I did what was called a 1031 exchange. And, the profit on that deal, I think I had never seen that much money in my life, but I elected not to take the money. And I bought a building at 19th and Wyandotte, where Mildred's was for many years. And then I bought what would become the original Screenland building. And I actually even asked my banker, my buddy from law school, hey, would you just send me a picture of the check? I just want to see it. But I bought this old abandoned ice house, and it was literally just giant freezers. Cisco had been in there, but it was the Mid-Central Fish Company building. And part of the deal was they had to shut down the freezers and drain the ammonia because it had an old ammonia system. And they had... it was probably the biggest renovation, 55,000 feet. But the good news was, as a freezer building, when I was cutting big, giant windows through 3-foot thick walls, but they were mostly full of cork. I think the utilities in that building were less than half of any building I ever owned. It was, and so that was a 55,000 foot building, and that building really was the biggest to date. It took me a couple of years. Now, by this time, I've got that methodology. I'm not painting, but I am general
Mhm.
contracting,
Mhm.
taking care of all my own buildings, and
Mhm.
I had sprinkler system guys, and I had, all the tradespersons, men and women that I was used to working with, and, renovated that building from the top to the bottom when we filled it. And I did that building, and I did, the building at 19th and Wyandotte, and then I had done the Universal building that I had sold, but I kept the Commonwealth building.
Mm.
And so, in the meantime, I ended up buying the Screenland Granada building, which was
Mhm.
just the old Granada Theater in KCK. I ended up buying the Armor Theater up in North Kansas City. The city
Mhm.
approached me and kind of made a hybrid deal. They would forgive the purchase price if I would promise to make it into a movie theater
Hmm.
and spend $2 million renovating it. So,
Mhm.
we did, and again, it's incremental. I did one, I filled another, I cross collateralized. I didn't take hardly any money out of anything. And one of my buddies often reminds me that even as late as the early 2000s, he bought a car for $10,000, and he heard me say, "Man, someday I'm just going to go and buy a car for $10,000," because I was known for driving the junkers or an old truck. But
Yeah.
but it really, that building did well. And then in 2007, as a Gibker,
Mhm.
local, he and I decided he was going to broker and sell. I was going to sell the Screenland building, and I was going to sell my Commonwealth building, and I was going to use that money and go buy more buildings. And I did. And as his brother always said, I think you guys caught the top 5 minutes of the market. And so then I kept my Armor and Granada for a number of years. And, then I decided I really liked, there was a really cool building at 3740 Broadway that I always liked, kind of a
Mhm.
little prairie style building. And I
Mhm.
bought it. And then I went downtown, and I thought, well, East Crossroads is, available. Everything in the West Side had been done. So I bought a building at 1701 McGee. And, by that time, the young man that was operating the Screenland at the original Screenland Theater, his lease came up, and the new owners wanted to triple the rent. And I said, well, they need to understand that the theater can't pay that, but I
Right.
understand it, so you guys can move it here. And they ended up taking a little space down at 17th and McGee and taking over the operation of the Screenland Armor.
Mhm.
So, did that, and enjoyed it, and was down in my neighborhood, the Crossroads. The little Midtown building was fun.
Mhm.
And then one very fortuitous afternoon, the guy next door to my first building, a guy named Byron Pendleton, Byron called me and said, "Hey, let's go get lunch." And Byron was a guy. He runs his company, but he always has always done real estate. Sort of like me. He got little
Mhm.
rentals, and he fixed them up, and he bought an apartment complex, and we were always sharing crews.
Mhm.
And when Byron was renting space on behalf of his company, Byron was doing all the contracting. He was hiring everybody. He was over there, and he was driven. And he said, "We ought to do a building together." And I said, I think we'd work well together. And this was 9 years ago. And we looked at a couple, and I go, there's a couple of buildings at 63rd and Cherry that I know are for sale, and they're in pretty rough shape, but we should go look at them. And we did. This is 2014.
Mhm.
We looked at them. One was a little A-frame that used to be a bank, and the other was just what they called the Alon's Theater, which was really an old brick building that was a school. And we liked them, and we made an offer. And at the same time, we looked across the street, and there was this big, tall, four-story building, kind of on stilts, looked like a prison, had brick with little tiny
Mhm.
windows. It was an old doctor's office. And next to it was a little squat one-story brick building. The big brick building was 95% vacant, and the little building next on the corner was vacant. The two buildings we were looking at were vacant. Matter of fact, the street from Oak all the way down to Rock Hill was 70% vacant.
Mm.
And I thought, this has got good neighborhoods north and south. I love what's going on east. It's not there yet.
Mhm.
And west is old Brookside.
Mhm.
And so Byron and I made a deal, 3 separate real estate deals to buy 4 buildings. We did it. And that is what really was the beginnings of Brookside East. The guy down the street, the Colonel Lassiter, he dubbed it Brookside East when he bought the old Blockbuster building. And as much as I wanted to call it Brook 63 or something like that, everybody said Brookside East.
Yeah.
And the young people love going east, and they wanted to be toward Troost. And then John Hoffman and Lance Carlton, they were saying, "Yeah, buy these things because we want to build apartments at 63rd and Holmes." There hadn't been a new apartment complex in Midtown in 40 years, and I ended up buying another building on the street and selling them the land adjacent to what was Heirloom Bakery because the Stevie family came in and renovated the old Standard Station into a marvelous bakery, and so there were a lot of good people and a lot of good things. And we ended up buying the rest of on the south side of the street. There's 2 big, large buildings with the parking lot in between, now home to Plate Restaurant and to Brady and Fox and Maddie's Foods and BKS Brewery. And, we started buying those buildings and kept filling them. And honestly, we went 5 straight years renovating buildings, maybe 6 years, and couldn't keep up. We would lease them before we'd finish. And at the same time, we bought the old Luzier Cosmetics building at behind Costco, where Billy's Grocery is today. And then we bought the old Bitterman Candy building, which is 31st and Gillum, a block to the east, which is now Urban Mining and Brewer's Kitchen. And so we just went and went and went and went and went. And we didn't take a paycheck for 7 years. I mean, I owned a couple of buildings of my own that were producing cash flow. And I was at a point where I could live off the cash flow of my buildings while I did more buildings. But the key is real. I share my enthusiasm, get buildings you love, share your enthusiasm. Your tenants who have that same enthusiasm will come in and they will make any landlord that much better. I mean, I got Robin Krause. I don't want to miss anybody because I've got so many great and talented tenants, but like Billy's Grocery and then Hand and Land and Case, I could go on and on and on about these wonderful people who are not only great to work with, but they're small business. And that's the prevailing theme of my commercial real estate is
it's almost all local small businesses.
All local, all small businesses. 90% are less than 1,500 feet. Lots of small offices, maybe 2,000s. We have, some 7,000, 8,000 square foot tenants here and there, Plate Restaurant and the Smith Bowman Law Firm and Brady and Fox and, but in Urban Mining. But, we have a lot of small businesses. And it's every single of the 200 plus commercial tenants I have, every one of them has my cell phone. And I'm not inundated because they realize call Billy or call Selena, my property manager or my Billy, my head of maintenance, and they'll get things done quicker and, we'll write up a work order. However, they know that the landlord cares. And I mean, remember a person in a $500 office with their small business, their office is every bit as important to their livelihood as a 7,000 foot tenant. And if you ever forget that as a landlord, then you shouldn't be in the landlord business because every single tenant, it's their lifeblood.
So over in the Brookside East area, so how many buildings do you have now just in that area?
In that area, we sold 2, so we have 7 there. Now, we just purchased 4 along Troost, and like 6,500 Troost is a 2-building package, and it's pretty close. It's sort of around the corner. We bought 5930 Troost, and young woman Elena Page has got a talent agency and a dance studio, and can't say enough about her. She's terrific. And so she's in that building. We bought 3740 Troost, which is an old 1940 Safeway, streamlined modern, and we're going through. And the 6500 Troost project is a 2-building project that was once the Southwestern Bell business office. So if you wanted to go get your phone service turned on, that's where you called, and they'd send a truck out of there, the van. And then, of course, I'm surrounded by people like Jason Swords and, Mark Moberly. These guys did the Brookside Commons apartments right adjacent to it. Well, they're stunning apartments. These guys know their business. Well, that makes mine easier because now I'm the ugly guy in the neighborhood. So I'm literally can't wait to get the side of my building painted so their tenants can have some belief in the future.
So let me throw a couple of things at you and see if you agree. Because I mean, I think as I look at like what you've done, just as like as an observer, even though I know you, I think about two things that really stand out that I think have helped you really succeed. So I'm curious if you agree or not. One is you're probably one of the most positive people I know and just an incredible marketer and promoter for all things Kansas City. And I think that that is infectious for a lot of people, and they love kind of being around somebody with that positive attitude. It probably draws a lot of tenants to you that maybe other people wouldn't find. That's one thing. And then the second thing is you've had a real focus on your commercial properties on a really creative way to do the renovations to keep your expenses low. So you don't go and hire typically a big commercial general contractor to renovate your buildings. You find a way with your crews to do them a little bit at a time here and there. And in order to keep the expenses down so that the tenants you have, they're a more affordable lease rate than some other commercial properties.
Yeah.
Do you think those are true?
No, those are good observations. I mean, I guess, I'm raised by a mother who, like you're going to college, you're going to pay for it. She gave me self-confidence and she gave me enthusiasm. And she made it very clear that, don't ever think that whatever gifts you have aren't anything more than gifts and spread it around. And so, but I am enthusiastic. And I did learn at a young age, buy a building you think is cool. Yeah. And if you think the building's cool, people will come there with you. Yeah. And some don't. And if they don't need to be there. But if they do, and you talk about their space and let them have some creative room and some input in what they're doing, it does spread great word of mouth. And tenants do like their landlord. Now, believe me, if it's hot and the air conditioning doesn't work, no one likes Butch Rigby. But they know that you're there. And you're right. You do get that. Now, as I grew and as I got more and more buildings, I had a hard time letting go of the leasing because I wanted to meet everybody. And I didn't want to oversell them. I tell them all, hey, first of all, this is a legal document. I want you to have it reviewed by an attorney, and I want you to understand every part of the lease. Our leases are middle of the road. And Pat Rigby, my late mother, said, honesty, honesty, honesty. And after that, honesty. You got to be square with people. But, I did had an old friend of ours, Erin McGrain, who is a talented performer, but she wanted to get into real estate, and we went for coffee, and she was trying to decide, do I go residential or what do I do? And I go, well, I like commercial. It's not as easy as residential. It's not going to but it's really cool. Well, Erin came in and started working with us. And I got to tell you, she's a natural. Well, she's a natural at everything she does. She's, again, honest, and she's
and has that enthusiasm.
And has the enthusiasm. And she also has an incredible eye for how things should look. And she's incredibly organized. And, so I have to say she has been a terrific to this very day. She went over to Clemens Real Estate when we started slowing down, where we weren't just leasing every single day. But Clemens and Erin and Clemens and that team represents all our properties. And, I'm very fortunate that way. So, the enthusiasm's there. And that's because I'm lucky enough to have a passion. That's why, my retirement theory involves a pine box horizontal, just, and so, that would be the first one. And what was our second point?
Well, it was more about the way you contract.
Oh, yes.
Do your renovations.
Yeah. The contracting. Yeah. It's interesting to me because I've been involved in projects where we had a general contractor, good ones. And sometimes I see 5 people in a meeting that takes 2 and really could have been done with 1. And it just drove me nuts. And fortunately, my business partner, Byron Pendleton, is exactly the same way. And who, by the way, brings, 1 and 1 equals 3 with this partnership. And partnerships are never to be taken lightly. I mean, we don't get investors in our projects. We don't do partnerships other than Byron and I go to our bank. We go to Wade. We go to, first, Morgan at First National, or, Great American, Matt Hofer,
Mhm.
or, Jason Carter Solomon, or, just all our bankers that we do business with. It's a very personal relationship. But Byron and I, the bankers, understand the way we do it. And it took a long time to build these relationships. I mean,
Mhm.
it took a long time for us to um, make them understand that we general contract, we construction manage. Now, we use all licensed contractors. We pull permits for everything in the city. We don't
Mhm.
cut corners. Everything's inspected, and we add elevators, we add sprinklers, we add life safety systems. Usually, we'll pull all the brick off. If it's ugly brick, we'll pull it off and put glass. But we won't paint old brick. We love old architecture, so we'll honor that, especially
Mhm.
on a historic one. But the truth is, by self-managing and self-developing, and then turning all that money back into the project. In other words, all our developer fees and all our construction management fees are rolled back into construction
Hmm.
immediately on every draw. By
Hmm.
doing it that way and not taking a bunch of development money
Mhm.
ahead of time, in the long game, we end up with a more competitive rate. We typically use a lot of tax management tools. I mean, everybody goes, "Oh, you're getting tax abatements. You're taking money from the school district," but that's not true.
Mhm.
All we want to do is be able to manage and understand what the tax structure will be as far as we can. And the school district, I always talk to them, and they're, honestly, if you just get on the phone with people and understand their perspective and they understand yours, I have found them to be great to work with. And
Mhm.
we have always developed projects that ended up making more money for the taxing districts
Mhm.
than the decades before we owned them.
Right.
So, it's a lot of things. And I, as a lawyer, even though I don't know if you need to be a lawyer, I formed my own PIA districts, and
Mhm.
I do all my own appearances in front of the council. So, you know, there are a lot of bright
Those
developers.
Yeah, I mean, those are some ways to cost save.
Oh,
If
yeah.
you have a niche or an expertise within that space. So
Yeah.
maybe, you have the legal background. If you're like me, if you had an architecture background,
Right.
if you had a marketing and sales or brokerage background, like any of those would come in handy
Oh,
throughout.
they all, I've been a broker for 40 years,
Yeah.
but I, and I literally to this day, now we're not doing as much right now, but any of the credit cards that we use for the company, I enter into QuickBooks because I want to
Mhm.
kind of have an idea what we're spending money on, and I kind of know how I want them categorized. But no, I can't do all of that.
Right.
And I have a guy, Jeff Westra, for 30 years. Jeff has been in charge of my books, and again, another honest guy, meticulous, much more patient than me. But my company wouldn't be the same without the company I keep. I
Yeah.
mean, tenants and employees, and we have a small number of employees. We
Yeah.
don't have a lot.
Well, I think you also told me that paid dividends for you when you hit the recession 2008, 10, 11. That you really lost very few tenants during all that.
I went through 07, 08, 09 through 10. We didn't lose any tenants. Now, at the time, I probably had 5 or 6 buildings, but we didn't lose anybody because, they were small business and we worked with them. COVID was probably the best example of why the small business model works. COVID, when it happened, nobody knew what was going on. Yeah, as
Mhm.
we all know,
Mhm.
we didn't know what was happening. And I had all these small businesses that were told they couldn't go to the office, but we called every single tenant and emailed every single tenant and said, "Hey, look, we can't forgive rent because our bank isn't going to forgive the loan, and the taxing jurisdiction is going to still charge tax, insurance, utilities, water, all the
Mhm.
expenses are still there. However, if you need some time, or if you need some deferral, I will defer the rent at no expense, no
Mhm.
interest. And, worked with my banks, and the banks called us. And what happened was, we literally had a, 200 tenants, and I don't think we lost anyone. The only one, the boys who run the Armor Theater, their lease at Tapcade down at
Mhm.
17th and McGee had ended, and they elected to spend their time focusing on getting the Armor Theater through.
Right.
So that one was vacant, but then I released it to Brick River Cider. But, and I remember one day I had a tenant, and her name is Tammy Daniels, and she is a real estate broker now, but she had a hair salon, and she was marvelous. Would come up and take care of her space whenever there was a problem. But she comes up to me on that dark day when everything was dead, and she sees me and she goes, "Hey, here, I'm closing my salon for 2 months." And I go, "Oh, here it comes." And she goes, "So here's 2 months rent in advance because I've been saving for a rainy day." And I know not everybody can do that. And I was so impressed. I knew at that very minute, we're going to get through this.
Mhm.
I knew for some reason, because I felt like, well, if I go down, everybody goes down, and
Yeah.
and everybody isn't going to go down. So, for me, the small business model is our bread and butter, and I truly enjoy going through my buildings, talking to my tenants, seeing them, waving. I give building tours, and one of my prospective clients goes, you just know everybody in the building. I go, I better. So they love it. It's, lot of smart guys do a lot more than I do.
I think and now I'm going to call you the George Bailey of Kansas City.
I don't know. I did meet Frank Capra. I did get to know him.
Well, there you go. It's that the building and loan model,
Yeah,
almost
well,
in a certain sense. It's all
it,
built on local people.
it is
Yeah.
100%,
Yeah.
and Kansas City is built on local people. Kevin, you know this, Kansas City is really unique. And I think the only people that don't know it are some Kansas Cityans. I mean, people come in from out of town, and they just love it because we do have green space. We do have a vibrant downtown. We do have interesting. Well, we do have the Chiefs. Let's face it, we do have the Chiefs. But I mean, it's such a great city, and it's filled. My friends from California come out here. They used to live here, and they said nobody has restaurants like Kansas City. I mean, you guys take for granted
Yeah.
you can go to a dozen killer, great local restaurants. We have to drive 15 miles to get to 2 or 3. So, it's.
Well, let's talk about Kansas City stuff for a minute, and shift to that. Back in the day, we were two of the Urban Society of Kansas City
We were.
folks, so with some of our good buddies. I'm curious if you were to think today, as we sit here now, one or two like really great opportunities that you see for the future, and on the flip side, like challenges that we're facing. So both of us are, urban core
Yeah.
people. So that's really probably more of our interest and focus. And obviously there's a regional focus too. That's
Sure.
interesting, but just thinking specifically about the urban core of the city, what do you see as good and bad on the horizon?
Okay. I see a couple of great opportunities. And, I truly believe if the Royals can go downtown, the ancillary effects of all that activity will be spread amongst dozens and dozens of small businesses. I think it'll make the streetcar extension that much more viable. And I think it takes advantage of 82 times a year, and a lot of people don't agree with me. They don't want to park. They don't want to do this. They think it's tax dollars. But I think as long as the tax dollars are on par with what they are now, I'd like to see the stadium downtown because it fills in the last gap. It creates that much more economic activity, and a strong downtown is a strong heart to the metro area. So, and I think the other thing that has to happen, and I think is probably even more important than that, is a practical and pragmatic way to develop the east side of our city in a way that doesn't move small business out, but encourages small business. That means there are two kinds of gentrification. There's gentrification that moves people out, and there's gentrification that moves people in or keeps them there. Um, as we did 63rd Street, we were pretty conscious of the fact that we were nearing that embarrassing dividing line, that where we had a highly segmented racially and economic dividing line in our town called Troost Avenue. And we were aware of that. And so we were pretty conscious, we said, hey, we won't be successful developing unless we bring in customers from east of Troost and customers from west of Troost, especially as we got toward Rock Hill Road and up and down the street. So we were pretty, and we inherited some good people. So we had to, recognize as we develop eastward that there is a whole, go up and down Troost, Paseo, Prospect, Woodland, 39th, go up and down there and just start doing a mental calculation of how many small businesses you see. And I mean, we'll boot the Quick Trips and the show, I'm talking about small businesses that you can see, and you'll see dozens and dozens and dozens. Now, you've got to understand that those small business people need to be kind of acclimated. You can't throw them in the pool cold. You got to let them, get in slowly.
Right.
And so we have to do this in a way that they can be a part of the success and the redevelopment. What we did over at 63rd and Rock Hill, where Brady and Fox and everything is, we had Alvin Brooks' daughter, Diane, had a hair salon. And she is another Pat Rigby. I mean, Diane had 5 children, lost her husband early. You think Alvin Brooks is a hell of a guy. Go meet his daughter. I mean, and she had this huge salon, and it wasn't very efficiently laid out. I mean, they gave her the biggest space they could, and the rental revenues were not anything that could sustain the multi-million dollars we had to spend on a 40,000 foot building to put new air conditioning in. But what we did was we figured out how to make Diana a much better, more effective space. And we kept her rent pretty similar to what it was as a monthly expense. And she had a much better space. But you know what she got? Beautiful, big, new glass windows, a state-of-the-art air conditioning system, a place where her customers come in, and they just, they all enjoyed coming there. But she is a great example of an entrepreneur who sat there in buildings and there are dozens of them who were challenged. And the guys that had her building before me were great guys, and they did a lot with it. And they really worked hard and started a lot of that good work. They paved the way for us. But as we develop, you can take the same talented person. And I will tell you, there's a lot of hair salons, both, a lot of them maybe with an African-American customer base and some not. But and let me tell you, if there is an apocalypse, lawyers and hair salons will be the last two to go because nobody is going to miss their stylist. But let's say you go into a building on Prospect and you go to that salon and people, they think it's great, but a lot of customers come in and maybe the building's got leaky roof, or maybe electricity keeps going out. Maybe there's, danger outside, and they don't stay, but you renovate that building and you make that building a much cleaner building, a much nicer building, but you remember it's a cool mid-century architecture, same stylist, same people, same customers. Guess what? The experience in the building and in the neighborhood is so great. And then more people come because it is a great place to go. Not just the people who want, I'm a friend of the stylist and I want to be there. Well, you got to figure out, how do you not gentrify that stylist out? Well, you got to be willing to create legacy rents for people who were there. You'll fill the rest of your building with some newer tenants and some young people. And young people want to go Troost and beyond. Young people of all races, young people of all economic. If you go up and down the 751 East 63rd, and I invite anybody to walk in the building, go up and down the stairs, wander around, you will see You'll see in the entire corridor 70% women-owned businesses. You go to the third floor of 751, you're going to have the Nguyen sisters with their Blush Nail Lounge. You're going to have Stacy and Susan, who are sisters that are blonde as blonde could be, from Overland Park, and have their salon. And then you've got, uh, Stellar Image Studios and the sisters who own a video company. And then you've got Precious and Aubrey, the sisters who own another salon. And we call them the Sisters of 63rd Street. And we've got Arbalisha in India that have a vegan soul food restaurant. But, they all share one common bond. In that building, we have an incredible demographic mix, racially, economically, more women than men. But, that's nobody ever gave the women a chance. Yeah. Think about it. What chances did women have, even 20 years ago to be entrepreneurs? But what they did find was they had a better work environment, and better work environments lead to better customer bases and better customer experiences. And we also tell them all, if you have any questions about bookkeeping, come and sit with us. We'll go have coffee. I'll talk about QuickBooks. I'd say QuickBooks is the most important thing they could learn. So I'm very excited. But what's going to happen is we got to quit making a dirty word out of tax incentives. They're incentives, They're not developer get rich things, They're really not. I mean, it's a lot easier to build a strip, center at 119th and Metcalf, where you're going to for sure get, tenants are going to pay $28 a foot, or you might get a McDonald's, or you might get some national stuff. I mean, that's making money. Yeah. But redeveloping and making a difference and making a change, we go to Prospect. Lumber costs the same to build on Prospect as it costs to build on 119th and Metcalf. And so does concrete and electrical work and air conditioning. But, so you do have incentives. You do say, okay, the thing hasn't produced any taxes for 20 years, to note. Now, all of a sudden, it is producing taxes. It's producing maybe not, as much as in a fantasy world, the building's worth $2 million because you put $1.5 million in it. Well, it probably isn't worth $2 million. But you know what? You agree to pay a little bit more every time. Then the sales tax happen. And then you start building stability with small business. And again, they're more stable than the McDonald's of the world. They're not going to leave. They're going to be there for generations. So I'm excited about those two. But again, I think John Sherman is a real Kansas Citian who is passionate about making his town better than, when he leaves it than when he found it.
Yeah. Yeah. And, in a lot of ways, kind of what you described to me sounds like the difference in focusing on people that are here and helping them be successful.
Absolutely.
Absolutely. And as opposed to leaning on out-of-town money coming to save the day. That it's kind of all of us working together to figure out, how do you help an entrepreneur that, might be struggling or new to it? How do you help them succeed?
I have more fun. And I have had a very good track record with startup businesses in our buildings. No track record, but they're excited, whether it be a small salon owner or a video company or, a lot of entrepreneurs. Maddie's Foods over at 63rd Homes, and BKS Brewery. Mm-hmm. These two were just, small families that had their, had their idea. Maddie's was in a food truck. Now they've got a restaurant, and BKS was working out of his house, and now he's got a brewery.
It's an incredible brewery, too.
Oh, it is. It's really good. Brian and Mary are fantastic.
Great atmosphere and everything in there. I'm so impressed with that place.
Yeah, that's where Barkley Advertising started, by the way.
Oh, is it really?
Yeah, From Advertising back then at that building at 63rd and Holmes.
Huh. Interesting. Yeah. Well, we're coming up on an hour, so we should probably wrap it up. So this has been great, Butch. I almost feel like sometime we ought to, if I could figure out a way to get like 6 people on a microphone, we should have a whole discussion about incentives and development policy and just kind of see where that goes. I think it'd be a lot of fun.
I think that generally speaking, the more people would understand about incentives, the more they would encourage them. I mean, even Crosby Kemper, when he was leading the library, said he thought 63rd Street's PIA district was the most productive one he saw, and he was happy with it, and he supported it. But again, it's just remembering that we as a community, we do need a good education, school system, and we do need good mental health care, and we do need all the things those property tax dollars deliver. but we got to be smart about it.
We also have to have people living here, development activity, people
right.
investing. Or if we don't have any of those things, then we don't have any tax revenue to support those
Oh yeah.
jurisdictions.
I mean, hey, you're going down to Plate Restaurant on a weekend in an area that 10 years ago nobody would have set foot on, you
Right.
know, and he's
Right.
serving great food and people love it. And they're, yeah.
And there is a reality to the fact that unfortunately everything involved with infill redevelopment is more expensive and harder.
Oh, I mean, we've got to sink 6 wells up at 6,500 Drews to monitor the environmental impact, and we've got to remove asbestos. And yeah, it is harder.
Yeah.
It's rewarding. They're not
is.
going to build those mid-century buildings like that anymore.
Right.
They certainly aren't going to build the old stone places around this town. So
we need to figure out how to do that again sometime.
Yeah,
that's a different discussion.
We do.
But I need to introduce you to a guy named Clay Chapman sometime, doing some really cool stuff with brick, triple white brick masonry, new construction in Oklahoma.
Oh, wow.
So
yeah.
I think you'd be fascinated by that. Okay. So what I like to do at the end is, this is called the Messy City Podcast. And so I like to ask my guests to think about a place that kind of fits that description, that's a little more just kind of funky and organic. Could be a city, could be a neighborhood, some place that comes to mind that you really love personally, and that you think about as a place you like to emulate or learn from, or just enjoy.
Well, there are so many. I mean,
sure. And you're well traveled, so it's tough.
I'll tell you what I really enjoy with my wife, Christy, and I love to drive around. I really enjoy going over to about 75th Street, where all the Drummond houses are. They're these mid-century, California-style houses, and you can get lost over there. Over on the Kansas side, you can get lost over there exploring and looking through this neighborhood that this architect designed. All of these, I call them Palm Springs houses. And I think that I've become a big fan of mid-century over the years. I was, not so enamored with it when I was younger, but now I think it's beautiful. And so I would love to see more of that kind of architecture. And then if you drive east of Troost in the 65th, 66th Street area, there's a lot of that kind of architecture there. So I'm very enamored with that residential area from about, the Landing. And I'm excited about a future for the Landing. I hope it's not a big box store. I hope I hope it gets rebuilt for what it was. Yeah. And, I think there's some opportunities there.
Yeah, no doubt. No doubt. And you're a big part of the reason why, for all the stuff you've done.
And many people like me, like you say, I'm the one good at getting publicity. My business partner works just as hard, if not harder than I do. And he goes, that's fine. You're the spokesman.
Let you take all the arrows and the attention.
Yeah.
So.
Yeah.
Well, Butch, this was great. Thanks a lot for doing it. I really appreciate it.
Kevin, it's great as always.
All right. Take care.
All right. Thanks.